Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nate Matthews Leader, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Maggie and Tim, and we are the Inside Agents. On this weekly podcast, we'll be discussing hot topics around football and the sports industry from two agents' perspectives.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Inside Agents. And on today's episode, we are discussing women's soccer and coaching with a very special guest. Our guest has played at the highest level with NCAA caps, pro caps, as well as Olympic caps, and now she is a coach. I would like to introduce Staci Wilson.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure, right, that we introduce a great friend, Olympian, All-American strength and speed coach, Staci Wilson. For those of you that may not know who Staci is, let me tell you, she's not only a 3-time All-American high school player, but she was also a 3-time All-American college player as well. One of the first African Americans to play for the University of North Carolina women's soccer. She's had her number retired at the university. I'm wondering if even she's probably the first to ever have this happen, but it's amazing. She was also a member of the United States 1996 gold medal winning Olympic team. She was also a 3-time Women's League All-Star, Women's League champion, state champion girls soccer coach at Oxford in 2017. She also coached the Pine School Boys Soccer Club and led them to win the regional semifinals and advance to regional finals prior to COVID-19. Staci, it's truly an honor to have you with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us today. We are truly honored to have you.
Well, I'm totally blushing right now. I tried to cut you off because I knew you'd do that. But yeah, thank you for having me. It's really pleasure is mine. I've listened to the first couple episodes of your podcast, and I'm already a fan. So happy to be on.
Thank you so much. Let's just dive right in. Staci, can you please let us know how you first got into soccer in the first place?
I guess for me, it was a little bit as organic as it gets, or natural. My parents didn't set me up for it. It wasn't planned. I just happened to move to Virginia. I grew up in New Jersey, East Orange, moved to the suburbs in Virginia, and that was what they played at recess. So I really enjoyed the game, asked my mom to sign me up for a team, and she did. So it started out kind of your local recreation house league, I think we called it back then. And then ended up playing for a competitive team from there and stayed with that same team all the way to college. You don't see that too often these days. Had a nice career at the University in North Carolina, like you mentioned. Got to play with some great players and experienced great coaching there. And that kind of set me up for time on the national team and a pro career after. So it ended up, again, being kind of a natural progression. It wasn't really planned. And it's funny that I'd never planned to go into coaching. It was just something that was planned on doing in between seasons, in between pro seasons. And I really enjoyed it. I'd end up, my first coaching job was at a private school. So that developed me a lot professionally because it was where I got a strength and conditioning license. I was able to still do soccer training for local teams. So it was really nice. And eventually, right now I live in Florida. I eventually moved to Florida. And like you mentioned, I've worked with a couple of clubs and high schools here. And I'd say these days I'm more transitioning. I still coach, of course, but I also am finding that I have a little bit of I guess you could say, a passion for coaching education, helping make other coaches better. bridging the gaps and understanding between sports science and soccer. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Truly amazing. And so since you touched on, obviously stepping into the coaching side after, being a professional player, I'm so curious with your impressive background and of course, being an American and winning, I mean, so many different accolades. What were some challenges that you faced as a player first? And then, of course, being on the coaching side, were there any challenges that you have faced in the past by being a player as well as a coach?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we all have challenges. When I look back at my youth career, I'd say I was very fortunate to have a very involved mom. And I won't say she was over involved because she never tried to coach me or, like I said, or push me in the game. She was just very supportive. My dad as well. So I'd say the challenges as a youngster, to some degree, I didn't experience them as harshly as they could have been because my parents were educated and kept me on the right track and didn't let me get too, caught up in little things that tend to go on soccer teams. I was pretty focused on, I went to a science and math high school, and it was kind of like always the grades came first. So, I grew up in the start of the pay-to-play era. Our coach was probably one of the first ones to be paid. And so it's interesting to see where it's gone from there. I'd say at the time he definitely was a professional and gave us coaching that we would not have gotten elsewhere. And all of us went to college, so I guess you could say it was earned. I'm not going to get into that debate too much there, but I enjoyed I enjoyed my youth experience. Like I said, I was on one team the whole time.
Stacy, you bring up a good point
Mhm.
because even me, I played soccer growing up as well, and it was kind of the same thing. Like, I never was forced to do it. My first memory growing up, like living, was me playing soccer at 3 years old, and I grew up with the same club as well. Like from the time I was U10 to all the way up to university, and one thing that you bring up, which is true now, because my dad has his own soccer academy here, and I've seen the dynamic change where if players or parents aren't happy with results, whether it's development or not, they leave and go to a club that's like winning right away, which necessarily isn't the best for the player's development, but people want results right away and not necessarily care for the development as much as I think back when I was playing and even when you were playing from your stories. Has happened. So I just thought it was very interesting that you even mentioned that you've been with the same club, and a lot of players that I know have been with the same club. But now when I even look at the coaching dynamic here, I see players that are like U15 and have been at like 6 or 7 different clubs already, where it's at the point where it's kind of hard for the player to develop and get comfortable because their parents are switching them to or trying to find the next best thing. So I can imagine that being a challenge for coaches now, trying to retain players, like,
Yeah,
as opposed to before, back in the day.
it was definitely it's definitely what you see now. I moved to Florida, and I feel like down here it really is. Most coaches you speak to from Florida, they call it the wild, wild west of soccer. It's just a crazy culture, like at extreme. So I lived in Virginia, coached up there, and was asked to coach what was quote unquote the B team. And we were happy. It was a happy B team. The players improved, and so that was more, and I was happy being the B team coach. I didn't really have an ego like I needed to coach the A team. I really enjoyed connecting with the players. But like you said, I do think the parents also had some foresight that this was good for their kids' development. And I know that with that coach that I had, he ended up our team, and it was we ended up winning eventually like 5 or 6 state championships, regional championships as well. 2 or 3 of them in the ages above us. Our age group got too easy at winning regionals, so we played up and won that. But we got there after a good 2 years of losing and just staying with it and competing, and not leaving the team just because we're losing. We're getting good coaching, maybe they were a better team. We need to improve. I can't imagine coming home and, I had good parents who, like I said, were supportive and didn't try to coach me. And if they were realistic, I can't imagine saying, "Oh, coach," complaining that coach said I did something wrong, because they would have been like, "Well, I guess you need to work on that then." Like, and just, not entertained it. So
that is so true when I think about just like my dad's situation or coaches that I've talked to in the past. The dynamics with like you mentioned, the pay to play model is literally coaches now, it's where you're like trying to please your customers.
Right.
So it's like you have this player and you, of course, you have customers too. So you have to give the customers what they want, where it's unlike if you get rid of the pay to play model, it's all organic. So you coached in high school as well. And back when I was growing up, I was on the cusp of like when DA just started, which didn't allow players to play high school. But I recall like growing up, high school soccer used to be a big thing. Like everyone wanted to represent our high school and there was so much pride with it. And then my like 9th grade, 10th grade year got taken away because US Soccer decided, okay, well, you're not allowed to play high school anymore. But you being a high school coach, I can imagine where like you get all types of skill levels. Like I remember when I was playing high school, there were some kids who didn't know how to do a proper throw in, and there were some kids who were like top players in the country. So can you explain some of those challenges coaching like high school versus coaching organized or club team?
Well, the challenges with coaching high school, well, let's go with first player experience. We called it customer service, and I don't look at it as serving customers, but I do try to create the best player experience for each one. Some of them want the high level competition and to be pushed. Some don't, they want more of a team experience, let's say. So, so recognizing that different players have different levels of skill, different mental, different, they're different places mentally as well. Some are just really super hungry and sharp, and others it's again more of a activity. So yeah, I see that the most in high school. And really, where high school, the way that I as a coach try to make it successful is I try to, how about instead of putting the players in a position where they're having to make a decision, I'm going to reach out. We do our own scheduling. So, I'm going to reach out to the clubs that my players are on and find out the major tournaments that they're going to be in. I'm not going to schedule my, harder games around those times. Kind of make it so that players can taper for their events where it's, not all about me and my high school team. So, you still have to have standards where they still have to come to practice. I don't make it where it's prima donna and a total different standard for my club players versus my players that, are just there, only play high school. So, I mean, there's a lot to it. And I think it's just, being ethical, showing character. I think that's where once they see that you aren't showing favorites, that you are holding everyone accountable, you explain your decisions, you communicate, it's, that's when they gain trust in you. And yeah, that's really what I've done. This season I coached high school boys, and I've worked with boys before, middle school boys though. This was I've more trained older boys, but not coached a team for a full season. So it was new and it was a learning experience. And I was very careful and deliberate on how I carried myself. And, happy to say that they were all also, I was fortunate to you're always going to have challenges when you're working with high school kids, but fortunately they were raised right, so to speak, and I didn't have any type of I was like one of the guys, I guess you could say, or I didn't feel like there was a gender gap or that I had issues just because I was a female.
And so that actually leads me into my next question. When you're talking about just being a female, did you experience any type of I want to say racial ethnicity challenges during your time as a player as well as being a coach? Because as you know, being not just a minority, but you're also a female. And so it's been said that within sports especially, or within anything that we do in life as women, and especially as minority women, as African American women, we kind of have to work about 2-3 times harder. So if you can touch on your experience as being a female in the soccer space, being a minority female, and some things that you have gone through or have experienced or have seen maybe, and also just kind of sharing that passing on that advice to others that may be going through something like that or scared to enter the space because of that.
Well, I mean, I was definitely raised like you, where it was just you. Understood. My parents taught me you have to be, twice as good to get half the recognition. So, make sure your stuff is in order. So, I guess in terms of being a player, during my playing career, that was back where you definitely didn't see as many blacks playing soccer. So there were more stereotypes and things that the players don't experience right now. But that was more back then. And I'd say as I transitioned to a coach, because I was fortunate to have the playing career that I did, so that warrants a bit of respect there. And like I said, parents being educators and focusing on that. And I was into the strength and conditioning and soccer. So it was just getting licenses and wanting to learn and find out. So I'd say, that made it to where it was difficult for people to be, difficult to experience the type of racism that you might think of. However, and they say that, and, that racism really occurs more. People think that it occurs more at, let's just say it people don't realize it's more sophisticated the higher up you get. So you might think you have everything together, but the form of racism just becomes more sophisticated. So I've definitely experienced some as a coach. Being a female, the double whammy, black female. But like I said, it's I think what helped me as well is I think being able to have the expertise in strength and conditioning. So I think that it would be harder for me as a female coach as well if I didn't have that. But I'm able to kind of defend my opinions and probably maybe out reason, out ration, out coach people that would be challenging me if I didn't have that, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It definitely does. I mean, I played recreationally. If I played professionally, I don't know. I probably, I don't know. I don't think I would have lasted too long in the league. Just because I know how I am. I'd want to be that striker. Like, I'm going straight to the goal with mine. And so I can only just, imagine what, as far as what you're saying. And I think that definitely is a plus to have the strength and conditioning side, because that's so important. I feel like with a lot of soccer players now, it's I don't want to say there's not enough emphasis placed on it, but I don't think that some players do understand how important it is to develop that skill
Exactly.
and have that skill and be extremely sharp. And Nate, you can probably chime in on this as well, from your experience, even playing, when you were playing as a youth. Was that something that was, told to you that it was extremely important, or did they just assume, because of course we're minorities, we're African Americans, so automatically we're going to be fast and have the speed and be strong?
Well, I agree. Like you said, a lot of players nowadays, they just don't know what strength and conditioning is. And there's so many myths out there that basically soccer specific strength training gets confused with American football training, or it gets confused with bodybuilding. And those are totally different, So, so that's one, just knowing how to use it and how to apply it, because it can be a critical. It helped me as a youngster stay injury free, but once I learned more about different training methods, it actually improved my skill. It improved my my neuromuscular efficiency, my ability to receive a ball, to control, so that's where there's I'd say a lot of athletes don't know maybe what it is.
And so how do we, being that you touched on that, because I'm curious now, right? Because now I'm thinking, so how do we change that? Maybe does it go into the education side, maybe, that you were discussing earlier about the coaching education side, and maybe coaching more players on the importance of it?
Yeah. I mean, that's basically it. That's where you do have a lot of places. I'm noticing a lot of different soccer clubs, or soccer organizing bodies, United Soccer Coaches, basically trying to do more. The clubs are trying to have a full-time person, or have someone that can at least come and teach their coaches. And then I actually worked with United Soccer Coaches this past year in doing a sports performance course. And the idea was giving kind of the essentials, because there's a lot that a coach can do. Youth soccer these days is now a 10-month season. And there's no way that, you can just be in season 10 months without understanding recovery or agility, these type of things. So yeah, that's basically it. Is trying to, I think coaches now recognize more than I've seen in the past, that they now see, okay, there actually is soccer fitness, and they want to learn more about it. You have coaches, and who knows what's going to happen with the way COVID-19 is affecting college programs, but maybe already a lot of D2 and many D1 schools, soccer schools, women's soccer, they don't have strength coaches for their teams. So if you're a head coach, you might be, if a lot of coaches, if you want a goalkeeper coach on your staff. Well, nowadays, a lot of coaches also want a soccer coach that has an understanding of in-season, out-of-season conditioning, because they don't have that professional on their staff provided by the school.
Right.
So.
Yeah, especially when we, speaking of COVID-19, how has COVID-19 affected you in any way? Because we know, we've seen obviously the global pandemic, we've seen the impact on sports, globally. But has it affected you in any way personally? And as far as being a coach, and if so, could you talk about a little bit about that?
I'd say I consider myself to be very lucky. So it has affected me. I think it's affected everyone. Um, I'd say it's just the isolation, to not go to work every day. I live down in Florida. My family's all up in Virginia and North. So I feel like I truly have been isolated. But if that's the worst that I can say, then I feel blessed and lucky. Um, I have a home gym, so I'm able to get some steam out there. I don't live in a super densely populated area, so we haven't had, I've been able to go to the store and not be too worried. So, yeah, I'm very fortunate.
Absolutely. So, Staci, tell me something.
And lastly, my club, I work with a club that we're not a pay to play club, so that's part of why I'm also lucky, because we were scholarshiping quite a significant number of kids before, and I've already talked with my club's competitive commissioner, and he's made it clear that we are not turning down anyone this year. So if COVID-19's affected a player and they can't pay, we're not turning away players. So I'm really happy to be going back in the fall, getting to coach my kids and continue the work we do, because I work with 10 and 11-year-olds, and it's a relatively underserved community. So
Nice. So let's get into some more in-depth questions. Because that was kind of like the warm up. That was kind of the warm up in a way. So I would like to know what was it like when you playing in the Olympics? Like, what was that like? Because that's something that, I mean, I myself never experienced it. I've so I can only imagine as a player what that's like to participate, but I've never been in that position. So what was that like?
Yeah. I mean, that was an amazing experience. I think one of the players back then, I heard her saying, I think it was Mary Harvey, describing it as like the Olympics. Everything about the Olympics was Olympic from start to finish. From making the team. I think we were in Atlanta back then. We went to a hotel, got our gear and all that, meeting up with other Olympians. It was amazing. We were down in Florida, so our team was stationed down, because most of the games were in Atlanta, but we had to make it through the preliminary rounds before going there. So I'd say I remember one thing that did stand out to me was the fact that we were going to miss opening ceremonies because we were stationed in Florida. And I thought it was really cool that the coach, he was like, no, they're going to be too upset, if they miss it. Like the whatever wear and tear the travel will put on their body will make them more excited than, it'll be worth, the excitement will be worth that. So we did get to go to the opening ceremony.
So before the opening ceremonies, because I'm going to chime in real quick. I'm just going to intercept, right? So when you were talking about how you guys had to pass the preliminary round, you're an amazing athlete, an amazing player. So did you know before the preliminary, did you say, oh, I got this in the bag, I'm definitely going to make it, and I'm going to be on that Olympic stage? Did you know, or did you kind of say, man, were you nervous? Like, what was that feeling like?
We had some pretty good competition back there. So I feel like, I actually, the team went to the World Cup in 95 and lost in 95. I didn't make that squad. But what I can say is that you have the women that were on that squad, there was just they were really upset about losing, and I'd say it was like on a mission to kill Norway back then, because that's who won the World Cup. So to some degree, like, I mean, there was a healthy fear, I would say, of China and Norway, but there was no it just, yeah, I did feel it kind of like the team was just on a mission at that point.
Interesting.
Staci, I have another question about strength and conditioning. Like Maggie said earlier, when I was growing up, there was not a real emphasis on strength and conditioning. It was more on skill alone. But I think that when I think about soccer, I think of mental toughness as well. And I think that goes more hand in hand with strength and conditioning. So do you happen to have any advice for young players now during COVID, like what they can do to maintain their strength? Because it's hard to like train and work on tactics, obviously, without teammates and stuff. But they can definitely do some strength and conditioning exercises, at least to still stay mobile and agile by themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's where, I mean, there's a bazillion different programs out there. I mean, really, if I sent one to my team, and I've sent it to other coaches that have asked, had to design basically things that kids can do at home. So give them some ideas. And that's where good old-fashioned wall sits, push-ups, sit-ups, these are things that they're pretty basic, but most kids don't do them. So it's just I would say if anyone wanted to email me, if you want to make that available, like I said, I have my own program that I recommend that's pretty basic and gives ideas, but I'm certain they could find a few online. One thing with soccer, one of the things that I like for kids, if they can figure out different balance exercises. Another good, actually, a good one to recommend would be, even if people are at home, the FIFA 11 Plus has a lot of exercises that are great functional. So it's used as a warm up, but it actually has a lot of strength activation exercises, and that's why it's a warm up, because when done, over time, it ends up providing a nice base of strength and being helping injuries. But
and just a quick note for our audience listening in, we will share some of the recommendations that Staci has provided for any of the parents that are listening, or for even professional players that want to develop and further develop their skills. So we'll definitely share that information. I may even enroll, but I don't know yet. I'm still trying to decide on that one, because it's been a while since I've been on a pitch, so it's been a while. So
you can do it. I'm gonna make sure I send you the program. So, yeah. But really, even with the whole COVID, like it even started. It went on for so long that if you're a high school, older high school player or a college player, you should be able to train the whole time and have a program provided to you. But with the younger ones, a lot of them tried, and after a while, it was, we did Zoom calls, and it was making sure, like, hey, you don't have to do the program so long as you're just doing something. Because their parents were, by this point, some just parents, I felt bad for them having to do schoolwork from home, having to look on online programs, so it really was just kind of staying active. Most of the kids, like when I grew up, I was a quote unquote tomboy. And so first grade, second grade, it was always doing relay races, climbing and jumping fences. That's where I lived.
See, you lived
New Jersey.
You lived in East Orange, and I was in Jamaica, Queens. Trust, I can relate, because I was always always with the boys, and I was doing what they were doing, and they were like, "What is she doing?" But I mean, we were doing it, and it's like I can do it
I was
too.
a professional fence climber. I could jump it, flip over it, everything. But what you do now, think about it, landing. I rode my bike. I didn't start playing soccer till I was like 8, 9 years old. But I was fit for it from riding my bike and doing all that jumping, landing. Like you said, what are the boys doing? A little stick ball, eye-hand coordination. I never had, the ball hitting me in the head because I was able to track it and look at it because, so there are the specialization. I'm not against specialization, but you got to know how to do it properly. And you can't just specialize because all of those other things, when you're a kid, you got to build the skill set, your fundamental skills, and then you'll be a better soccer player. But, playing stickball made me a better
and
soccer
now
player.
all these kids do is they play a bunch of Fortnite and things like that. So I feel like that is also a challenge with coaches because being a coach back then, there weren't as many distractions, whether it's social media or like video games and such. Like you said, like there were kids playing stickball, there were kids jumping fences, there were kids outside. Most of the kids like that I've coached and seen develop now, most of like the way they interact with players is literally through headsets on video games. It's not going outside to the park where it's like, hey guys, let's play stickball, or let's play kickball, or let's play grounders, or let's play manhunt. It's more, let's hop on Fortnite, let's go fight this team, let's play FIFA.
So they lack the social skills, like the in-person social skills.
Even like from a physical standpoint, you just have a lot more, I would say, kids that are like stronger, faster, like have more balance, are more elusive back then. But I think kids now are more technically sound and more talented, like on the ball. But physically, they do lack that balance or that like just necessary like basic core strength, where coaches have to spend more time on that. But like you were saying, coaching education, coaches don't really know the proper way to do it, because even growing up, I've had coaches bring in strength guys, but they're like body lifters or they're track stars, when that doesn't necessarily correlate.
Exactly. Putting CrossFit programs.
No, you're completely right. It doesn't correlate to what you're doing. So I find like it's so hard for coaches to get the proper education, because like you said, there's this big emphasis on strength and conditioning, but when you talk about strength and conditioning, coaches don't necessarily know what that means for their players in soccer.
Right. And there are and I've a lot of coaches have unfortunately been given strength coaches that like
even
you said,
at my university,
even at
I
college,
never had one that was soccer, that was specialized in soccer. It was body lifters who worked with like the baseball or football team.
Right. So and that's why we get a bad name, us strength coaches, because in the soccer world.
But see,
like that.
It makes me wonder.
So I'm trying to basically let them know that some of us do get it, and we aren't just, given bodybuilding programs.
And it makes me wonder, because we're talking about strength and conditioning, and Nate, you mentioned it even from the college level. Would you say, feel free to chime in, either one of you that can probably answer this question for me, but would you say in a place like Europe, do you think strength and conditioning is a big emphasis there? Because we know that in America here, it's not, it's somewhat of an emphasis, but would you say it's a big emphasis in a place like Europe, and that is why the players that play there play the way they do versus how our players play here in North America?
I think that's a part of it. I do think, you have men's soccer and women's soccer, and I think they're at different places. So maybe, and this is just my humble opinion, I can't say for sure, but I feel like the men's soccer over there does have a little bit more of the understanding of science and, functional training, and that's more incorporated throughout. Now, the women's soccer, what I've noticed, especially when I speak to women that are from England, is that that they feel that the physical side there is not what it could be. Those women don't seem to, my understanding is, I feel like they have another level in them that they don't know, if that makes sense. So they, and because that was the U.S. back in the day, and it to some degree still remains, but that's part of what people warn is, you can't make that everything. But what I was saying is, back in the day, we really knew that we were prepared, and we were physically trained and sharp, and a lot of confidence came from that, so I feel like the what I've seen is overseas, but the women, I feel like they're aware that they have another level and that they do look up to the athleticism of U.S. women. But again, we really have to make sure that we are advancing our talent pool, because once their women over there or all around the world get get our sports sciences resources, then what will we have?
And that kind of jumps into that next question of, you were talking about strength and conditioning within, the men's soccer versus the women's soccer. Would you care to share with us and our audience your views on men's soccer in North America, women's soccer in North America versus men and women's football overseas? It's a loaded question, but I myself would love to hear, you as a coach, as a former player, what your views are. Like, what do you think about the state of, of the sport, and of the different genders, and what that looks like? I mean, we do also know that for the women's side, at least, we know that they're setting there's high standards that's happening, especially because they're the first American league that is going to get back on the pitch and kind of show America what is happening. And so a lot is riding even on that. So I'm very curious about your take on the men's versus the women in, overseas in America.
Well, I mean, I guess it's a loaded question if you have a strong opinion. I really don't. So, I mean, it's in terms of the verses, I have opinions on U.S. soccer and the way that our leagues and professional league is kind of forming, and obviously right now it's there was no DA when I was growing up, so to see them come up with this and then have it dissolve, it's just I don't know, all very humorous in a way. like they don't know what they're almost thinking out loud. So US, we with MLS, we just the MLS taking the DA. I have some people on one side promotion relegation, and I think that there's a lot of validity to that. It's there seems to be something where we're not able to take advantage of our full scouting pool just because of the way the incentives are set up.
That's in regards to North America or just MLS?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that question's coming too.
I mean, it's all connected.
We're coming with a question that's going to get to that part where we're going to talk about, the culture, from every side you could possibly think of just in North America soccer. And I know that's another loaded question as well. But
here's what I'm saying in terms of, and then North America, again, I can't speak as much for Canada or Mexico, but again, when I look at the soccer and one of the ways that we're trying to develop, and I'm right here and I see that a lot of people is pay to play. Well, a club, when I say incentives, my understanding is that overseas, if a club develops a player and they turn pro, that club gets a payment for that, for having developed them. So with that, their focus is going to be on quality and developing quality players, because they want to that payment is going to be huge. So now you take that out. MLS clubs don't do that. U.S. soccer doesn't do that. I wonder why you have clubs here that are more interested in the registration fee and customer service than they are in developing players.
Thank you for that, because
So
I've
that's
had
what I mean.
conversations
I mean,
all
yes.
around, and it's the same thing, because if, like, say for instance, there are grassroots clubs. A grassroots club develops a player, that player goes to MLS, and then he signs a big contract. That grassroots club doesn't receive anything back financially. Everywhere else in the world, even Ajax's academy, once they take a player, say this player's like U12, that club that they took the player from continues to receive payment up until the boy's 24. So when you're thinking about coaching in America, or like I'm talking about Canada and USA. I'm not sure how it works in Mexico, but I know for sure there have been academy players that I've even spoken to who are like, listen, I'd rather stay at my grassroots club because I'm getting proper development than even move to an MLS academy in the first place. Because they know, hey, listen, the training's better. I've been with this club, whatever. I entered the MLS academy system, and sometimes I've heard they don't get the proper development that they are expecting, and two, there's so many restrictions within regards to even playing high school soccer or even doing anything else outside of what they really want to do. So even with MLS deciding, okay, we're going to take over the DA now, what does that necessarily mean for grassroots clubs and scouting? Because even for parents who aren't soccer fans or know what's going on in soccer, they might not register their kids for the proper leagues, but then there are a lot of talented players who just don't get scouted because they're not playing in that quote unquote DA or ECNL or whatever other leagues they decide that players should be funneled to. So you were.
That's a good point that you touched on, that both of you touched on, because I just remember having a conversation with a few folks from the MLS side, right? And I thought it was so interesting that when they were talking about recruiting players to come and play, they were interested in pulling a player from overseas to then turn them, or let me word this right. The words were to recruit a player from overseas, specifically Europe, let's say, that has a buzz locally there, but bring them to America to play for MLS where they can be made a star. And my question was, well, why not go back to the roots, right? Go back, look at, why not develop and turn a homegrown player right in your country instead of going to another continent to say, I'm going to bring that player here to make them a star. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. And I mean, I have other views on it, of course, but I just thought that was so crazy. And, listening to you guys talk about, obviously grassroots, and Nate, you and I, we have a lot of these discussions about these young, talented, players that, Staci, Nate and I were even saying, like, man, to get young talent, it's almost like we literally, as agents, would have to get on a plane and go to another continent to try to bring that talent either here to America or move them to another club. Whereas there's only some here in America that there are a lot of talented people. I'm sure we in America can find, exceptional talent, but the question is, it's like, where?
It's also the fact that MLS created, this is the only league where there are territory rules. So let's say, for instance, I've witnessed this. I've gone through it personally. Let's say a player is from, let's say, Atlanta. Atlanta United's academy can only hold 20, 30 players, for instance. But if you're living in Georgia, Atlanta United has the first rights of refusal. So say, for instance, LAFC or another academy comes in, they're interested in your player. That player has to get permission from a club who doesn't want them. And if the club decides, no, we're not interested, or we don't even want to respond, then that player can't even move to another MLS academy and play and develop. So there's just a lot of rules that are in place in America that don't make sense, because
Crazy.
you have some talented players, but it's like, if there are 300 talented kids in one area, let's say LA produces a lot of talent, Miami produces a lot of talent, New York produces a lot of talent, but if they don't make the 20 spots for New York City FC or Atlanta United or LAFC or LA Galaxy, those 300, those millions of players in LA, where do they go? They can't go to Seattle. They can't go to Colorado. They can't go to Real Salt Lake. So it's like the whole U.S. model has to change within development of these players, because the way it's set up right now, you can't build successful teams that way. You can't if you're cutting it off to so many, or creating so many rules where I have a talented player, but I can't even go play for a club 3 hours away because this club won't give me permission. Like, that doesn't make sense. Imagine the players at Arsenal's academy, and then because he lives in Highbury, they're like, oh no, you can't go play for Chelsea because they're in Chelsea, and you have to get permission from Arsenal first. It doesn't make sense for the player's development. That's just my opinion.
So that's something on a list that needs to change. No, I agree. I agree totally. When I look at,
I mean,
go ahead, Staci. Go ahead.
No, well, I mean, there's so much that was just said, and I guess if we start with, I'll 100% agree. We have a scouting issue, like having it set up with these different MLS academies. I think I saw someone tell about the number of players that get seen through those academies, and the number was something like 2,000.
Wow.
So we're basically looking at 1,000 players out of all of the youth soccer. So there's obviously an issue with that development program or scouting or whatever you want to call it that U.S. soccer has going on. And the import of talent, I feel like, when you start looking and talking about that, I feel like that's where you step back, and you have to look a little bit more. You can look historically, you can maybe look at other sports, but partially, one, why wasn't soccer popular with African Americans? And that's to do with the history of the country. Back in the there was no you couldn't make a living from it. It was more of a gentleman's sport, and it was meant to kind of to be that way. So one, you're not going to play something that think about it, in the 1940s you get more as a black baseball player. So that's one thing. But now more will, now we have more African Americans playing. Now why are we still importing talent now? So that's got to be to some degree by design. If it's not necessary, why are we doing that instead of there? And again, my only thing I can think of, if I'm trying to learn and look at other sports, I'm pretty sure NBA has gone to importing talent. NFL. So here's what I'm getting at is, one, you want to control the labor, and control your workforce, control your black bodies. And what I see with NFL, more black players that you have, those players now expect to be coaches, and there to be a progression. So you really, maybe it's a little bit too much of a conspiracy theory, but I think it's a little bit of avoiding that route that is going on also. So it's bring in someone from outside, versus looking from within for that reason.
That is a great point you bring up, and it's so true, because even like when you discuss, like, when I, like, say for instance, I go into a community, or our community, and I ask players like, oh, like even soccer players, for instance, what do you think about the MLS, or what do you think about leagues in general? First, I've never heard a player ever mention that the city that they're from, that's their favorite club. Like it's always a European club that's mentioned.
Club. Yeah,
It's
true.
never, oh, I'm from Atlanta. Oh, I'm an Atlanta United fan, or oh, I'm from New York. I'm a New York Red Bulls fan. It's never one of those things. It's always, oh, I'm a PSG fan. I'm an Arsenal fan. I'm a Chelsea fan. But it's like, why do we have this perception in North America that we don't think soccer is cool here? It's because, like you were saying, our league is like the country club league if we're taking all of soccer, because our people, like, there's no, like, players can't really afford to go to the games, as opposed to in Europe. In Germany, I know that they give parents breaks on tickets for them to take their kids to games. Here, tickets are $100, $200 tickets, where parents can't necessarily afford to bring all of their kids to see like their local club, which is sad.
Yeah, that's that's a big part of it too. I think when I look at clubs like when you look at that, and your point of how a player or someone or a kid will say their favorite club is Real Madrid, Barcelona. It's all of these European clubs, but it's very rare that they'll talk about MLS. And sometimes they'll even admit it and say, I don't watch MLS. And then if we're talking even with African Americans, when you start to even ask them, who are some of their favorite players? And if you say, who's your favorite player within MLS? And they kind of look at you like, well, I don't really see too many of people that look like me that are playing within MLS. Mm-hmm. So my favorite player is going to be Cristiano Ronaldo. It's going to be Messi. It's going to be Pele. And you know, Staci, talk to us about that as far as African Americans, because you touched on it a little bit about just the African American representation within, you know, MLS, but overall North America within the sport. I also want to hear your views on coaching for African American, coaching opportunities for African Americans within North America. So whether that's college, the women's league, of course, MLS, Canada.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, actually, if we're talking about coaching in general, I mean, the statistics are what speak. And trying to pull, because at the Black Soccer Coaches, at the United Soccer Coaches Convention, we did a panel of prominent Black coaches and their experiences, and on it we showed some statistics, and it was really eye-opening. And that's where we get the I think it was something about like there was maybe one MLS coach that was Black in the entire league.
Yeah.
Yep.
He tends to be the one that everyone always refers to.
He's the only one. I mean, it's the only one who can refer to.
I mean, yeah. You know what? Actually, when you think about it, he is. So the question becomes then, right? Is that okay? They can say there's one, but I mean, man.
Technically, he's not African American.
Say what?
But they can say he's one. But the interesting thing about that is because he's from Jamaica, correct?
Yeah, he's still African American.
Yeah,
I mean, he's Black. Yeah. He's Black. Well, I don't know. He's Black, and that's good. I'm not saying he ain't Black. Okay,
African American. He's still to the world. He's African American. Right? They just look at it as, hey,
okay.
Wow. You know, I mean, I was happy somewhat because I was like, hey, they finally gave us that shot. But yeah. I'm going to say this, Staci. I'm going to say this. And then I'm going to let you finish on that. I'm going to let you finish on that point. What frustrates me is this.
Okay.
We know your accolades. when I look at someone like yourself, I'm saying, man, the National Women's League, because that's a whole nother league in itself and a whole nother topic. But it's like, why aren't you coaching? Or, like, why were you ever presented an opportunity to coach for a team within the National Women's Soccer League here in North America? That's a question that I always tend to ask and say, man, and Nate, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. What are your views on that?
I I agree with what Staci's saying. The numbers don't lie. There's so many coaches I run into, and this is just if I take business and soccer and combine it with like Black culture or minorities, it's always minority coaches develop the talent. So you'll see a lot of minority coaches at grassroots levels. But when it comes to the pro level where the money is, then now you don't see them anymore. And that's just the foundation of how America has been. If we really think about it, you have a lot of workers at like the lower level, but when you have like the C-suite, the executives, you start to see less and less people that look like you. So we can argue like, hey, we need more, but the fact of the matter is, if we think of America as a whole, that's a reflection of it. African American coaches develop great talent, but then when money is involved, and it's just like the agency business as well, that's why Maggie and I are agents, because when you think about it, there are no agents there really that look like us who can say, okay, well, now that our player needs representation, well, we can represent them the right way, as opposed to somebody else where it's like, it's just money for them. They don't necessarily care. And
absolutely,
that's just the way North America is when you think about it as a whole. Like, they can develop the players and all that, but when it's time for them to get the chance with professional sports at any level, it's like, I'm not too sure about this, but they can develop the talent up until that level. It's really interesting, but that's America.
It's something that's going to take a long time to fix. And I think, to Nate's point about, just us being agents, I mean, let's keep it all the way 100. Even for myself, it took me years to find a female that looks like me, that is within the sport. And I'm not talking about as a publicist or a marketer, but I'm talking about as an actual player agent, or let alone even an attorney, a sporting director, someone that it really has that full connection with the player. And, I myself have heard things where it's like, oh, are you going to represent players within MLS? And I said, well, of course. I'm not going to keep myself within a box. And, this is a conversation with whether it be a Caucasian or someone that's a well-respected agent. And they're looking at me like as if, oh, okay. It's almost like a, well, good luck on that. Because, Nate, like you touched on, the statistics, this is America. We see what's going on. And it's just always been that way. And it's very frustrating. It's frustrating because, like I said, back to my initial question, Staci, about why hasn't the National Women's Soccer League said, I am going to hire Staci Wilson to represent or to coach Orlando Pride or to coach Sky Blue FC? It just doesn't make sense to me at all. At all.
Well, I guess, we're talking about the statistics, and it fits the statistics for sure. I think I found the one that we discussed that resonated with a lot of people. And basically, the MLS, they had the one coach, so 4.2% African American coaches, and 23% players. Assistant coaches was 11%, and they gave themselves. They were graded as having A for racial hiring. So they were about So then you the one though that, like I said, really that people that really got to people was when we talked about college sports. Okay. Now, college sports, 2007, African Americans held in 2017-18, basically 7.8% of men's head coaches in the NCAA. Women's head coaches, 7.3%. The numbers for assistants were 20% and 15% for the men's and women's teams. And African Americans were so underrepresented as head coaches in Division III that the percentage of women coaching men's teams was higher than the percentage of African Americans coaching men's
for
teams.
Division
Wow.
3.
So
That's not
yeah,
even Division 1, because
Division
we didn't
III
even get to
really
Division 1
not.
yet. Wow.
Well, I mean, Division III. I mean, that
Absolutely.
still
Yeah.
speaks. Those are your
Absolutely.
academic schools. That's kind of where we talked about the sophisticatedness becoming of racism becoming higher. That's an example of it right there, in my opinion, my humble
Wow.
opinion. So, but with I can't really say with the women's league for sure. I do feel that it's a bit of that league has a little bit of musical chairs with the coaches, and there's much new blood goes in. You could look at this one coach get fired from one team, pick up to the other team, go to another team. Like that's happened within the league many times. So, and then I think to some degree, I've been I haven't really talked about it here on the podcast too much, but yeah, I've seen and experienced a lot of racism, and I think that looking back on my career, I was never one to bite my tongue, and to some degree, to the degree that these are positions that maybe they want to make sure that they have somebody that's not going to say the wrong thing. They're afraid of what I'm going to say, because if I see some racism, not just in the moment of right now, when all of this is going on and people are want to come and make statements, but when this is not going on, I've always been saying something, and yeah, they don't want that type. So I can bite my lip and maybe get a job, or I can keep on doing what I know is
And
right.
it's crazy that we've been put in a situation in not just sports in general, but in life growing up, where it's like, I even put out a statement myself where it's like, we're the only group of people where it's like, if we feel like we speak on injustice towards our people, we can be affected financially. And it's happened in so many situations. Like, even like if we look at Michael Jordan and what he said about, oh, well, Republicans buy my shoes, so I'm not going to speak out, when he was playing, which I as much as I can say like, oh, that's wrong that he said it, I do understand where he's coming from, because it's like, when you're a pro athlete, when a lot of things happen in our communities, a lot of people look to you, and it's like, you may be the only voice that they may hear. So they're like, oh, well, you're speaking for all of us. Do we like you anymore? Like, do we feel comfortable around you anymore? Like, oh, you're just disruptive because of da 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 da. Like, that's not all of us. Where it's like, no other race feels like, if I address any situation, my family can be affected, my finances could be affected, I can be blacklisted. So I completely understand where it's like, people are afraid of speaking out, because it's like, well, if I do, I know that I might get fired, or if I do this, I might not get a check. Where it's like, if I stay in line and bite my lip, then it's okay. I'm cool. I'll be hired. My life is easy. But on the inside, it's like, I'm not willing to sacrifice that anymore. Like, too much has been going on.
Too much, way too much. And I've been up pretty early today just because of different, text messages, calls coming in from overseas regarding a client of mine, and what he decided to do this past weekend to, I want to say, pay that tribute to, the late George Floyd. And he decided, hey, I'm going to do this. No one's telling me to do this. Not my publicist, not my marketing person, my agent. No one's telling me to wear this under my uniform. And basically, this particular player, Jaden Santrue, played in the game and decided after he scored a goal, I was going to remove my club shirt uniform to show, that it has affected me as a young black male. And I'm saying, hey, I'm justice for George Floyd. They're now saying he could possibly be fined for doing that. And you have Weston McKinney, who is also an American but plays in Germany and plays in Bundesliga. Same thing. They're like, oh, he wore a headband, so he tied the headband around his uniform, so he could possibly be fined. To where you had, I specifically watched this. I watched a media blog company show one post where they showed, this player saying, hey, this is justice for Floyd, to where they deleted that tweet, retweeted a different one, still talking about the same player, but just showed a image that showed him amongst his peers and his colleagues, because they didn't want to really touch on the whole justice for, George Floyd. And Staci, Nate and I had this conversation earlier regarding, obviously the current events, what's happening in the world. And, I said to Nate, like, it's surprising to me that this is the first time that I'm seeing an issue this big to where the global soccer football community is paying tribute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this is historical for me too. I've not seen this, so I'm very curious to see where this is going to go. We talk about transformation, and I've heard some politicians say, "Oh, this is going to be, real change." And things are certain to change. That's inevitable, but we'll see, because racism that it does have a way of just reinventing itself over time. So, I'm hopeful that things will improve, but, I am also a little bit
realistic.
I'm looking for?
You're realistic. You're realistic.
Yeah, realistic. There we go.
Yeah, you're a realist. I mean,
Okay.
let's
Yeah.
we have to call it for what it is. It's I mean, even down to my players, every single one of my clients have decided to do something, and people look at me like, oh, is that a like as if that's a bad thing? And I say, no, I'm happy. I'm happy that they did that. I didn't tell them to. That was their decision. They just ran it by me, and I said, hey, go for it. Because at the end of the day, it's a personal thing, it's a personal situation. And even, Nate and I touched on this too, as far as being agents and representing African-American players. Nate, I know you mentioned something earlier about how at one point, I think you were asked that question, like, is it like that you only represent minority players?
And that is, I always tell people, it's not that I choose to represent minorities. It's like many different facets. It's one, because of the players that I work with, they're so young. I know that because of the color of my skin, it makes it a lot harder for certain groups to trust me with their children. It's not like I haven't tried it. It's just I'm realistic, and I know that the likelihood of me working with people who look like me is a lot higher than me working with people who don't, based on beliefs, values, and society. It's not that I choose to. I'll represent anybody. I'll take anybody on. But it's just I'm realistic in knowing that, hey, if something arises, I know that I can be looked at as, hey, he doesn't know what he's doing because or I should have gone with somebody else because da. And it's also because, like we said, like there is not any representation with our community where players can look at certain agents. Like I said, they have coaches, but it's like when money and contracts are involved, those coaches disappear and they're replaced with somebody else who does not look like them, can't relate to them. So that's the main reason why I'm working with minorities. It's not because I choose to only represent them. It's just I'm realistic in I know the way society views me. And although there are great people across the globe, I won't turn anyone down because of race. I just know that the parents will feel more comfortable if I look like them. And that's just what I choose to do. It's not because of anything. It's not like, oh, I'm anti da 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 or this. It's just I'm realistic in knowing my niche in this market.
Absolutely. And have you experienced that on the coaching side, like where parents, if you were coaching like the youth development, or if parents would say, I don't know if I want Staci coaching my kids, and it may not even be about what's happening on the pitch. It could just be by the color of your skin.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, that's where I say I'm blessed that where thick metal has given me to where I don't experience as much as I would in many ways, and I recognize that. The whole conversation though is kind of reminding me of you know, how you're saying you're trying to be there for that person and basically have someone. I'm looking at it from the side of them having people around them in the support, because what we're talking about that happens, you know, what say easy sport that you could see it in for a while, let's say would be baseball. There's something called the conveyor belt, you know, that, and I didn't come up with that term. It's the gentleman William C. Roden, and it's basically talking about how, you know, you take the athlete and try to get them on a, you know, they have to be packaged and done, and they have to act just right and be on this, and somehow on that conveyor belt they kind of lose themselves. You know, it's I believe he called it the passage through the white controlled system is contingent upon not rocking the boat, not being a troublemaker, and making those in positions of power feel comfortable with the athlete's blackness. So basically, they're on a conveyor belt where they're always trying to do that because they're always around white people and having to do that. So when you add to that agents, and, you know, agents like you two and black coaches and people that can basically be mentors, that helps take, you know, the athlete off of the conveyor belt. You know, I wonder, maybe there were parts of my career where I was on it, you know, inadvertently, you know, went to UNC, maybe I was. I don't think so, but I'll entertain that. But so yeah, just, you know, it's, and the dangerous thing, and this what stood out to me from it is that Roden says that the dangerous thing about being on about the conveyor belt is those that are on it don't know they're on it. So, you know, before you realize it, you've kind of lost yourself. You know, these athletes. And I'll say just lastly on that point, you know, because we were talking about you know, identity and speaking up and not, you know, speaking up and not being afraid to lose your job. There was a great article called Why Black Athletes Run from Black Identity. So if your readers
Can
get a
you
chance,
repeat that one
I
more
would
time?
recommend,
What the name
you
of
know,
that
Googling
article was?
that.
Why?
Fantastic article that's titled Why Black Athletes Run from Black Identity. Yeah. And I mean, he talks about, you know, Tiger Woods. He talks about more, you know, recent athletes, but it's a great article. So, and it was written by a gentleman named Howard Bryant.
I wonder if I probably came across that and had so many other things to do and got sidetracked, because I like to read a lot of those type of articles because it obviously relates to me. I'm not an athlete, but, you know, on the agent side, it's important for us to, you know, be in the know of those type of things. Yeah.
You all can be critical to
absolutely.
the mentality
Absolutely.
and helping. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. But
I'm preaching to the choir on
we're
that
a little
one.
different. Nate and I, we're different. We're different. We're kind of like, as I like to say, the new era agents, right? And we're doing things very different. That's why we have, this podcast, and that's why we have guests like you on the show to be able to, show a different, to show different insight, a different perspectives, from a different lens, because a lot of people only kind of see it one way, and they just, it's like it's just not really available. So we want to make that available to the audience.
Yeah, we got to inspire each
Absolutely.
other. So, yeah, share our stories.
Last question, Staci, is now with now we're gonna talk about our future for coaching. Where do you think it's gonna be headed now with the DA shut down and like coaching past COVID? What do you think U.S. soccer or what you're gonna do or what we should do to help develop talent after this all passes?
Maybe if I'd watched more webinars during this COVID-19, because I'm certain there were some about the direction of our game. It's I think I can't say exactly, but I do know that I feel like it's kind of broken things down a bit, where it's kind of like sometimes you have to break it to fix it. I guess I've heard that saying before. You gotta. So I do think that what has gone on, like it has made it exposed pay to play even more. We've already known it was an issue. We've known that we have these players that are getting overlooked, and it's just made it more of a mainstream issue. So, we'll see. We'll see. I think, because basically, I just try to keep up with conversations that I'm, keep up with, the different threads on Twitter or this and that, people that I respect. And it just seems like I said, where this pandemic is putting a lot of clubs on their back, and we'll see who's still standing once it's over. And to the degree that it was becoming even more money of a game, this has maybe stopped it a little bit. So, I don't know.
We're seeing a lot
we'll
right
see,
now,
but
even just with MLS and what's happening with leagues like MLS and USL still having to, still haven't been able to come to terms with the players and the players unions and associations, and it's very interesting because it makes me, just as an agent, look at the leagues from the outside lens and say, wow, to see that these players are giving their all and you still can't come to an agreement, or you're really making it about a money issue, versus places like Europe, to where they were able to find a way to work it out.
Yeah, well, again, that's where.
No, you're not being dismissive. Once again, I told you, you're a realist.
I'm not just being. What I'm about to say is, I hate to. Yeah, exactly. I remember being around, and that's how old I am. I was playing back in '94 when MLS started, and some of my college friends went in MLS, and I remember hearing the little things on how the league was really doing unfair things, underhanded things contract wise.
Still,
so yeah, 25 years later, it never at any point in time got better. So
What do we do
we
as
just got to keep on pushing.
African Americans that want to get into the sport? So from the player side, what should players do that really want to get into the sport and they're based in North America and they really want to play? What advice would you have for those players?
That really want to play, I mean, to go for it. You got to just study the system. You got to be strategic about how you're trying to get involved in it. So from that, it's not just having a dream, but okay, how are you going to get there? What's your path? Is it, through knowing the leagues, knowing the teams that are in your area, knowing who they're connected to, so that obviously you have to also just have your foundation, your basis, your of skill and being a well-rounded player. So with that, I would just say, to, I don't know, try to stay inspired, try to just stay in touch. There are a lot of people out there these days that, the players do have role models. When I was growing up, I had Flojo and Mary Lou Retton. Those were my role models. Yes. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I'd say, just the players, you have to be persistent about it. But at the same time, here's what I'm with. To me, being a pro soccer player was never the end all. It was something that actually, I could say I wanted to do it, but there was always a higher purpose, I could say. So, go for it. But I guess like what I'm getting at is,
right,
I don't want them to go for that and then forget their education. Like, to me, we've barely even touched on like HBCUs. So something like an HBCU, they go and they look, and I think the studies on HBCUs find that the most blacks that graduate there versus a predominantly white institution end up in higher paying jobs. They produce, say, the most judges and professionals from our black judges, and they come from the HBCUs. So I'm just saying, go for it, but also make sure you're making an impact and keeping your head grounded in the education and other things that make a difference.
That is a great point. So, those are all great points.
Absolutely. So Staci, once again, this was a great conversation. We definitely have to, definitely have you back on the show to touch on the other points that we were not able to touch on. And I'm sure when we do bring you back on the show, there's probably going to be a lot more that has happened within within the soccer space. So where can fans and the audience find you, like on social media, and how can they get in contact with you? If you're interested in them getting in contact with you, or should they just contact your agent? How does that work?
Well, I am on social media. I am on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Not much of a Snapchatter. And LinkedIn. My email is staci@stacisoccer.com. I do need an agent. I hear there are some good ones out there.
Yeah, just check them out. Yeah, we could probably definitely.
I might know one or two.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. What? And also to thank you for sharing. Like where folks can find you, and we'll also tag Staci's handles on our Instagram as well as Twitter. on our social pages. So lastly, this is probably the final question. What's next for Staci? What should the audience look for with Staci? Because we know that you're an amazing coach and we see what you're doing, but what is next?
That's a great question. I would say that the audience can look for is I'm really right now, like I said, passionate with the coaching education, and I'm working with United Soccer Coaches to promote a course that like I said is something that a coach can take and put on their resume and know that it gives them a better look at a university position. So it would basically be like a soccer strength conditioning certification. So right now that's kind of, I guess you could say, like my baby, what I'm working on and what I'm excited about. And I think we're looking to maybe release it maybe during the convention in January. So if the convention's in Anaheim, they'll be able to come and actually take it. But if not, we'll figure out the online format for
Well, Staci, once again, thank you so much for joining us here on the Inside Agents podcast. We truly appreciate you taking the time out to, talk with us and hang out with us and share your background and share your views on, soccer and North America leagues and just, different things that players should look at and should consider. So we're super grateful for having you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, like the pleasure is mine. I really like your style. I like the way that you all, very organized in the questions and the thought process. So I am very much looking forward to coming back.
Absolutely.
And, maybe, going a little bit deeper next time. So
thank you, Staci.
But I really appreciate
Be
you
safe.
all. So.
All right, guys, that's a wrap for the Inside Agents for our women's soccer and coaching episode. And we'll be back next week with another great episode. Thank you guys for joining us. All right.